Hey everybody, it's Skully. So I wanted to take the opportunity to make a video kind of talking more about other types of illnesses other than just mental illness. Not only are there a lot of illnesses that can be confused with mental illnesses, but they can also kind of coexist as a result of things like mental illness in general. Like you can have physical symptoms from mental illness, or you can have a condition that maybe in itself is not mental illness, but it can cause things like depression as a result. So I kind of just wanted to make a standalone video talking about that. So what are some types of illnesses that may be confused with mental illness or may coexist with mental illness? Well, chronic pain probably has to be definitely up there, one of the ones that you probably see the most, because pain is something that everybody deals with to some degree. And it not only does it differ from one person to the next, but every day is kind of different with that. You can have some days with chronic pain where you may not feel nearly as much pain as what you're used to, and some days can be worse. And pain is something that is, because it's subjective to every person, some people wear it differently. Some people noticeably look like they're in pain, some don't. And it's a very hard condition to treat, not only because there's stigma around painkillers and whether somebody's actually in pain, but pain is not a very easy vital sign to measure. It's considered a vital sign in healthcare, like, your respirations, your heart rate are vital signs. Pain is technically considered one too, but it's just very hard to accurately measure pain, not only because it's different in everybody, but it can change from one moment to the next. So that is a condition that you can see that commonly exists with things like depression, because if you are in chronic pain and people aren't listening to you, or if you just have to deal with it on a regular basis and it affects your daily routine, then you may see things like anxiety and depression that go with chronic pain. So that's kind of one of the examples that I was wanting to mention in this video. Another one is autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases are conditions where for whatever reason, they're not really sure why, but the immune system attacks healthy tissue and organs, can cause things like pain, inflammation, and a lot of debilitating symptoms, as you could imagine. Like there's lupus, there's type 1 diabetes, there's Crohn's disease, a lot of thyroid diseases like Graves' disease and Hashimoto's diseases. Hashimoto's is considered to be an autoimmune disease. So, and that's just to name a few. There's some that affect the spine and other areas of the body as well. There's even some that affect the brain, and it can cause various types of like encephalitis. So that can actually be fatal if it's left untreated. And as you can imagine, those are not very easy to get diagnosed with, because they're not, you have so many different diseases in the world that cause various symptoms in various parts of the body. There's only so many tests that can pinpoint certain diseases, that it can make diagnosis very hard, which can affect treatment and affect quality of life as well. So for people with diseases like autoimmune diseases, it's there's a lot of stigma behind, like, are some of those real, or what causes those? And if it's not stigma, it's just there's just so much research that needs to be done on them because they're just so poorly understood. So autoimmune diseases are another pretty prime example of really kind of hidden diseases that people can deal with even if they're very, very sick, because again, everybody handles pain differently. And then, of course, there's things like addiction, where, we don't have really a lot of information as to what necessarily causes people to have addictions, but it's very heavily implied that addiction and mental illness really kind of go hand in hand. And there's a lot of stigma behind addiction, just like there is mental illness. But as you can imagine, if somebody has a history of substance use, it's not super uncommon for them to have something like depression or OCD or bipolar disorder kind of going with that. Sometimes people may use them to help try to treat a pre-existing condition, like some of the ones I mentioned, like chronic pain, mental illness, basically to self-medicate. Sometimes people find themselves in situations like that as a result of trauma and trying to survive, trying to get through it. I mean, people go through so much. Everybody has trauma and everybody handles it differently. Sometimes people turn to things like substance use to survive, to cope, maybe even to be a distraction. I can't really speak on that from a personal standpoint, but just from stories and stuff you hear, I mean, again, everybody's different and can have different reasons for some of those situations happening. So it's definitely something to think about if you hear stories like that. Like, try not to jump to conclusions because you just don't know somebody at the end of the day. So, yeah, those are some conditions I wanted to talk about that, again, maybe they're not always part of mental illness, maybe they are, but there's a lot more to mental illness. It's than just emotions and depression. They can affect the rest of the body as well in ways that people don't always think. One of the more important ones I wanted to mention is that sometimes people can have anxiety and certain mental health related issues when they could be having a very, very severe illness like a heart attack. Sadly, there are plenty of people who have had panic attacks, gone to the ER thinking they were having a heart attack when they were actually just having a panic attack. But what if it was the other way around? You start getting sweaty, clammy, anxious. You may think, oh, you're having a panic attack. Before you know it, you start getting full-blown chest pain, shortness of breath, and before you know it, you're keeling over on the floor because your heart is, and you're in cardiac arrest. And if you don't get CPR and or medical attention in time, that can be fatal. And even if it's something that you get treated for, there's always the possibility you could have another one. And there are things that mental illness can cause as well. If you have untreated mental illness, sometimes you can have things like a heart attack from stress. You can have a stroke, or you can get sick. And then there's people who've had things like they've gotten stressed out and then they got COVID. Then they had long COVID symptoms, which either cause medical issues in itself to the body. And then there's people who maybe had a clean bill of health, including no mental illnesses, that they had long COVID symptoms and suddenly they're on antidepressants now. So that's another one to think about as well. Now, another disclaimer at the end of this video, I'm no doctor by any means, but it was just something I kind of wanted to mention just to get people thinking. Because when people think of mental illness, they think of mental illness, they think of physical illness, they think of physical illness, they don't think of depression, they don't think of anxiety, they don't think of the two being related. And the thing is, your body is like a machine. Your heart isn't just your heart. Your brain isn't just your brain. Your brain and your heart work together. Your lungs work with your heart. All your organs work together to keep you healthy. Your immune system works with the rest of the body to keep you healthy. So you don't necessarily think of things like depression and anxiety causing a heart attack or any of that stuff. But this is why talking about conditions like this is so important, because how often do you see somebody with a heart attack that maybe they were going through a lot of stress and they didn't think about it until they ended up in the hospital with cardiac symptoms. So then they realized, hey, in addition to treating the heart attack, maybe they needed to treat the anxiety and the depression causing the heart attack as well. Or sometimes people get diagnosed with maybe depression or anxiety and they don't think of what could happen long term if it's left untreated. So, sorry if this is a lot of information for one video, but it was just something that I wanted to mention just to kind of give you some food for thought. So, I've kind of been having some health issues lately, and I don't really know what's going on with me specifically, but it definitely did get me thinking, with some of the other stuff I have to deal with, if they're related. When I'm going throughout my day-to-day life, sometimes I forget, like, if I get stressed out, is this going to affect my heart? Is this going to affect my brain? Is this going to affect people around me? You kind of just get so stuck in your day-to-day routine. You just sometimes don't think about how something can be the domino effect, where two things who seem very unrelated can in fact be related. So turning your back on something like anxiety and depression can eventually cause you to catch a cold from your immune system getting lower, that kind of thing. So, hope everybody's having a great week and enjoying the weather getting a little bit better outside, maybe depending on where you live, of course, because it's a little crazy here sometimes. But until next time, have a great day, guys.